Today is a very exciting episode for me. I'm joined by Jack Devnarain. Most of you know him as Rajesh Kumar. So to be honest, I'm having a groupie moment because I grew up watching him. I didn't know his real name actually when I was growing up. I always thought it was Rajesh Kumar on screen and off screen. Indian guy, very buff, very tough, very rich according to Isidingo. And he sits with me today and we're going to speak about actor rights as well as his journey from being a cop to being an on-screen talent. Jack, how are you?
Gino, I'm good. Thank you. Thanks for having me on this episode.
So having you here today, we're going to chat about a number of things. The first one is Rajesh Kumar. How many people still call you Rajesh Kumar, even though you have done other roles?
I have members of my own family calling me Rajesh Kumar. It's disturbing, and it's something that I realize it's part of my life now, and it speaks to how the show and the character embedded themselves into people's everyday lives. If you think back to that time, it was merely a function of how we used to watch TV back then. Because you used to finish work at a certain time or finish school at a certain time, come home at a certain time, supper will be ready at a certain time, and then at a certain time in the evening, that show is going to start. That's just how we used to watch TV back then.
Yes.
So in a sense, the show, the stories, the characters became part of your family life. All that has changed now. So with that in mind, I say that's probably, in a sense, the golden years of South African TV, because we simply never will get that back as a function of how we watch TV nowadays.
Your persona, or your image, or your character rather, was this affluent, rich peacekeeper of the community. After that, you just chased bad guys and you were shooting things. So if I look at your roles on the more recent Silverton Siege.
No, there have been a few. There was Isono was a TV character. The man's in prison, a violent criminal.
Justice Served.
Justice Served. He is a crooked cop, also quite a violent kind of guy.
Ronnie as well in 31 Million Reasons.
Ronnie Gopal, yeah. And that was very close to home, though, because I had just started in the police at the time the actual heist took place. So, it was a very meaningful production for me, going back into my cop world. And it felt like putting on, your favorite jacket that still fits perfectly and it still feels familiar and the pockets are all in the right place. And it gives you a certain swag.
Yes.
Because you know it so well. So that production meant a lot to me. So, yeah, the bad guy roles are never that far away, even on Imbewu. I was very fortunate to have exceptionally gifted writers working on those productions. And my intention was to meet those writers with the character that they created, to meet that with a performance that was never going to judge how evil this person is, simply to play this person as I'm a guy doing the best that I can with what I have. There is no person in your life, if you're looking at world politics or domestic politics or the local social scene, there's no bad guy out there who thinks of himself as a bad guy.
How do you transition from being a cop, law enforcement officer, to now being an on-screen talent? And was there any bridge? Did you start out by playing cop roles and then shine as another role? What was that path like?
To begin with, the transition for me was not difficult, because even while I was in the police for nearly those 10 years, I had trained as an actor. I studied as an actor. I did speech and drama as a matric subject. I took speech and drama as a minor course in the course of my degree while I was studying law. I did an undergrad law degree and then went into law enforcement. So drama performance was still part of my life. I was performing in amateur dramatics and, some touring shows, very community-based theatre projects, which I absolutely love. And for me, performance was still very much a part of my life, even when I was in the police, because I had opportunities to do little things that had come up, some theatre roles, Shakespeare, some work on some film projects. I worked as a background actor. I worked as a supporting actor. All these things enriched my world as a performer. I was hungry for all of it. And when the time came, and it was very much also a function of the time we were in, looking at the mid to late 90s, there was growing acceptance that in the stories that we tell on South African TV, we're going to actually have to reflect the lives of people who are not white. So that became part of a process that the SABC embarked on, as part of their mandate.
Yes.
They had to be telling these stories. And with that, people discovered that they're Indian people too. So, the thinking obviously was, how do we factor in an Indian character in a show like Isidingo?
Yes.
So, you could broadly describe the way in which Indian people are perceived in this country as, well, they're merchants and businessmen. Let's stick him in that kind of a story.
But sorry to interrupt you, but even in your notion of like Indian people and business acumen, you were up against somebody like Barker Haynes,
Yes.
who was also like a mining magnate. So you have one white and you have one Indian. Not to say you were pegged off against each other, but why then have two similar roles, just one more darker than the other?
You needed to have equal stakes in order to make the conflict work. And the audience, you can say safely that it wasn't merely isolated to the SABC3 audience. This was the broad TV viewing public accepted that these two guys are in a battle for control of the business. And then there's a love interest with Barker's daughter and all of that. And people read it, picking up on the spirit of the time as well. When I joined Isidingo, it was 2002. At the time, there wasn't nearly the kind of racial polarity that we are sensing now. There was a different approach to interaction, engagement, the willingness to cooperate, understand, to integrate. That was a huge part of how the story played out on Isidingo, and it spoke to a South Africanness that I actually miss being presented on TV.
Up next, we're going to speak about actor rights in a second. In America, they're in hoo-ha in terms of them as actors getting commission or getting compensation at least for things that have been reflighted. And I say to you, this is SA. When you're Rajesh Kumar, I paid you 20,000 Rand a month for 3 years. You got your money, you left. There's nothing in the contract that binds me to pay you for repeats. How do you then approach that?
Well, you're talking about a structural imbalance within the industry itself. And it's a very different conversation to the one you would have on set about trying to fix a character or fix a story. We're talking about fixing an industry. And when it comes to that, it's a much bigger discussion because you're talking about the rights of broadcasters, producers, actors, and how you balance off the various intellectual property rights and those that can be commercialized. Currently, we're looking at two pieces of legislation that were introduced as statutes in the 60s and in the 70s. And they're not fit for purpose in the modern world. So we've got to try and revise them. And in doing so, those two pieces of legislation are currently sitting in Parliament, and we are making submissions to say this is important. It's going to change the way in which actors earn. It's going to give South African actors the right to earn royalties for the first time in South African history. And at the same time, you're trying to create a system for fair regulation of the industry. When people look around creative industries around the world, you would look at currently, we referenced earlier the US actors strike. Fantastic. It's a good thing because that's what keeps the checks and balances in place to keep an industry fair.
Yes.
So in the US, they have the right to create a union. Actors can belong to a union and they can engage in collective bargaining. That's where you and me and the broadcaster, the producers and the actors all sit at a negotiating table and come up with a fair contract that's fair for everybody.
Yes.
And if it's not fair for everybody, then it's equally unfair to everybody.
Yes.
And that's the point of it.
Yeah.
And then you'd come up with what's a fair rate and what kind of royalty you should be earning. That is the process of collective bargaining. In South Africa, though, we are denied the right to create a union, to belong to a union, to participate in union activities, or even collective bargaining.
Yes.
So all the commercial rights are sitting with the producers and the broadcasters. And the actors are coming along last in the line to sign a contract that they have no right to input in. They don't have the right to make any suggestions, to make recommended changes. There's no mechanism for that, which is why we are calling it a structural inequality, which is why we are petitioning the Department of Employment and Labor to say you cannot derive the full benefit of this sector unless you are prepared to create some mechanism for fair regulation.
In this setting, this structural imbalance of the industry, who are the key players and who would make that call?
Inputs have to be taken from industry organizations. So the people who are actually doing the job on the ground are people who have to make those inputs. It would be even better if those individuals who are doing the work belong to organizations, because the organizations then carry a mandate on behalf of however many members there are in that organization. And then the representatives of those organizations sit together with government. And you need government because ultimately government is the executive arm that is going to manage the regulation and the application of the policy or the law in the industry it's trying to regulate. But remember, there's a separation between government and the lawmakers. The legislative arm, that's Parliament. We've got to tell Parliament to make sure that these laws are being made, or at least that they are being amended. Once we have the kind of laws that we need that's going to introduce the balance that we are talking about, then we're going to make sure that government is our partner in making sure that it's being rolled out fairly. Then you're going to get the industry organizations now talking to each other within a regulated environment.
To simplify, what is the problem?
Actors, and I'll speak specifically for actors' rights, the problem is that actors do not have any right to make any input in respect of their commercial rights, their earning rights, their moral rights into the contracts that they are forced to sign.
Going into those contracts, are actors aware of this?
No, not many of them, not all of them. Part of my difficulty is trying to get actors aware of what it is they're signing. And I'm one of those people, having, started my career 20-something years ago. I was only too happy to sign it because this is my break. This is my chance. I'm going to act with South Africa's best actors on South Africa's best productions. I didn't stop to look at what it meant. If you had asked me back then, if I knew what it meant, would I sign it anyway? I'd probably say yes. But I'm in a position now where I have a duty to make sure that actors understand that the provisions we are getting now will literally give you one more payday, just one more payday, and that's it. Because what artificial intelligence is doing now and how it's being deployed by studios and producers and broadcasters is that they are telling you in your contract that when you sign this contract, you transfer to me, the producer, the right to record, capture your image, your likeness, your voice, your performance, so that I, as the producer, can replicate you in any future production in perpetuity,
Yes.
and never have to pay you again.
Yes.
That is the current reality. And if actors don't understand what that means, then I should be not maybe telling them to choose a different career.
As an economy, each country has got their biggest export. Ours would be mining, it would be your crude metals, etc. With acting, which is seen more of like a soft industry because it's not actually tangible, what if government just says we simply don't care because we are selling off more steel to China than you guys are bringing back as an industry? Therefore, you guys are not important, or important enough at least for us to recognize.
That would have been a valid argument 30 years ago. In those years, certainly the 60s, 70s, and 80s, there was a growing sense that the creative sector was going about its business quietly, but certainly not enough to say these are the products of this creative economy is an exportable commodity that's going to generate jobs and generate revenue, which is why in 1967, when the Performance Protection Act was written into law, just 9 years later, it became obsolete. Why? Because TV arrived. In 1978, you had the Copyright Act that was written into law. It didn't understand what the internet was in 1978. So if you look at where those laws were and where even what the creative sector was doing in the 60s and 70s, you moved from television in the 70s to VHS in the 80s. And then you had DVD in the 90s. Then you got into the age of the internet, the digital age. Now you've got the internet, streaming, social media. So the industry itself has taken off as technology and time allowed people to create and generate and consume content. The work that we are doing now, because of technology, has made it more exportable than it has ever been before. Now we are contributing. Now we are looking at nearly 5% of GDP. That is a massive amount of money. We are creating work, not in the traditional sense. We are still not making employers and employees, but through the freelance sector, we are creating what's called atypical work, where people are working in their own time. You've got bloggers who are churning over massive amounts of money. You've got influencers, you've got web designers, you've got graphic designers. All these people are bringing life into the industry, into the creative sector. And there's a massive amount of overlap with other industries because of the way the creative sector functions. Just in film production alone, you're looking at, yes, the people involved on set, the people who are operating the cameras and the performers and the director. But take a step back. What do you have? Well, you've got technical crew. You've got creative crew. Take a step back. Well, now you've got administrators. You've got office staff. You've got writers. You've got accountants and lawyers. Take a step back. Now you're talking about the drivers and the hotel and accommodation staff. All told, a single production would account for thousands of people involved directly and indirectly. There is no way that government can choose to ignore the impact of the creative sector on the economy.
I want to summarize it into 5 points, and I'm going to repeat some of them. So one, and as basic and as simple as possible, explain what is the current problem that talent is facing in South Africa.
There is a lack of fair regulation in the creative sector, and it's something that is desperately needed in order to guarantee the survival of the sector.
What is needed for that fair regulation to happen?
Knowledge of the sector to become informed inputs to advise government of how to introduce fair regulation and to address regulation as a structure and not merely as a mechanism available to the economically elite, the people like the broadcasters, for example, who have all the money. You can create a system of regulation that belongs exclusively to them. It doesn't work if you are the most vulnerable person working for a plate of food in a production environment. You need to create a system of regulation that is going to help everyone in the value chain, from the most vulnerable to those with the most money.
And who would be the key players in this new structure?
You would have to have a collective bargaining environment. This is not something that we're inventing. This is something that already exists. It exists in all the major sectors that I spoke of earlier. Collective bargaining is a basic principle of regulation. The International Labour Organization, the ILO itself, has positioned collective bargaining as a core principle, as a foundational principle, as a pillar of managing the creative sector globally. South Africa, in that respect, is an anomaly. We are not just behind as a creative sector the rest of the world. We are falling behind Africa, where already Kenya, Nigeria, Morocco, Mauritius have already introduced collective bargaining rights for their creative sectors. We are sitting so far behind that it is embarrassing that we have achieved as much as we have without having a complete shutdown and implosion because of the inequalities and the injustices that we are seeing.
You've been on Isidingo. Isidingo has now been canned. Then SABC, which is the broadcaster, who have rights to the production because they commission the production, when they reflight Isidingo, is there a situation where, because you obviously now as a performer can't claim anything from the broadcaster because your agreement was with the production house, and your agreement with the production house it's ended, which means that whatever the broadcaster chooses to do with that piece of content is between the production house and the broadcaster. And if the production house says, well, we were able to finish the series as best as we could, we were able to pay everybody as best as we could, according to our knowledge, we don't owe anyone, and Jack comes with this notion of royalties, doesn't that throw a spanner in the work?
The broadcaster who drafted the contract in SABC, in this particular case, talking about the SABC contract was written and approved in 1997. And since then, they have made sure that they are named in their contract as carrying the legal liability to pay actors for repeat broadcast fees and commercial exploitation fees. It's in the contract. So even though I'm no longer contracted to the production, the broadcaster who has ownership rights over the series still has the legal obligation to pay me, even though they're exercising the right of their commercial ownership. They can derive whatever commercial benefits that are theirs as the holders of the intellectual property rights.
Yeah.
But as long as they continue to flight it, as long as they continue to license it to other broadcasters or even to streaming platforms, contractually, they are still obliged to pay me repeat broadcast fees and commercial exploitation fees. They cannot remove themselves from that obligation.
And why don't they pay you? Because they haven't been
No,
paid.
they haven't been. Just, I mean, literally in the last week, they've been contacting people, including me, to say, we realize we owe you money. Which is fascinating because just towards the end of last year, they contacted me to say that they owe me money for a commercial exploitation for a series called 37 Honey Street. That took me by surprise because I did 37 Honey Street as my very first TV series. I was still in the police at the time. I took unpaid leave to come to Johannesburg and shoot that series for 2 months. I was playing a cop. And
Come from Durban to Johannesburg.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, I was still living in Durban, still working shifts and things. So it did take me by surprise, and I confess I laughed so loudly when this young lady, the clerk, was doing the administration of this claim, was giving me this information to say, you need to send us this invoice. This is how much we're going to pay you. I said, sorry, which series? She says, 37 Honey Street. I said, it's fascinating. It's literally 25 years ago. And the SABC is now looking at paying me for something I did 25 years ago. So yes, talk about things move slowly. Yeah, they do. But they have introduced a system where they're going back to look at all those contracts and looking back at all their logged rebroadcasts.
What is SAGA doing to educate actors?
We need actors to understand the value chain. I know actors right now that couldn't tell you the difference between a producer and a broadcaster. I know agents right now that couldn't tell you the difference between a principal performer and a background performer. We need all these different people to be educated on what the process of production is and who are the players. What is the value chain? Where does the money go? Hell, where does it come from? And these are the questions that need to be answered in order for us to make insightful recommendations to government. Because I can see what's happening even now, is that the recommendations that SAGA is making, for example, the majority of actors in this country don't know what it means. And I, as SAGA chairman, have a duty to tell all actors, whether they are SAGA members or not, guys, this is what we need in order to regulate this industry for you to get your payday. For you to have your economic and moral rights to be protected. This is where the thinking comes from. This is what the research says. This is what the international treaties have articulated already. This is how we're going to implement it in this country. And these are the people who are going to make it work. Because what we have is actors functioning as individual little islands, even though we are a collective working in this massive industry and we're not talking to each other. Being a freelancer means that, as I discussed earlier, you can't unionize. So you can't function as a collective. All those people who said you should go on strike, you should stand up and refuse to work, they actually have no idea what they're talking about because they forget not being unionized means that we don't have the right to go on strike. There is no such thing as engaging in industrial action if you are not protected by your union.
Yes.
So what we are seeing is that actors who are forced to sit and work separately as freelancers are being blamed for not standing together. You never created a mechanism for them to work and do anything as a collective, to take action as a collective. They can't be activists as a collective because you made sure structurally that they can't do that.
So is SAGA now a union or just a facilitator?
We're a guild. And the reason we had to form a guild is because, again, not having the Labour Relations Act to support us, we couldn't form a union. So, all right, SAGA will be a guild and we will work towards the formation of a union. Currently, we need people to understand what's in the bills. Royalties is a big thing. Your commercial rights, your moral rights, because drafting legislation is an enormously technical process. And there are legal concepts and principles that need to be explained and drafted and reworded. Literally just putting a comma in the wrong place will change the balance of a person's rights,
Yes.
even to the point of negating them completely. So understand, SAGA is run with a group of 9 executive committee members, and we are all volunteers. We've been doing this now for 14 years. So we don't have a lot of resources. We're a registered non-profit organization. So in educating actors, we've got to be applying ourselves to where are the bills now? What's going on? Do you understand what's in your contract? Do you understand what the vision is? And in that process, we have enormous opposition to our message. So however we are reaching out to actors, there is an even greater force that is being exercised by the people who are resisting regulation, who are resisting actor rights and resisting transformation of the sector, who are trying to confuse the issues, that are trying to make it seem as if all the other sectors in the world should be regulated except the South African creative sector. Certainly, it bears saying that it's to do with who has the profit and people's fear. In the same way that people feared what a constitutional democracy would mean to South Africa in 1994, there were those elements that I'm sad to say still exist and persist in the poison that they put out in order to protect their little slice of the pie.
Apart from demonizing SAGA, it's still accessible to all performers, correct?
Yes, all performers, because we understand, we are very keenly aware that SAGA does not represent all South African actors. We represent our members. And even if we are simply reaching out to our members to update them on a regular basis about where's the discussion with the bills, here's a workshop to discuss your contract, here's a discussion about artificial intelligence, for example. We try to keep it current, and we are using social media channels mostly. But obviously, because we have a member relationship established, it means we are able to contact people on their email, and we are able to send them newsletter updates. Information is a huge key. Unfortunately, we have also found that not a lot of actors take the time to read. It's a difficult thing to try and overcome. And certainly it's an experience that we found we have in common with the actor unions around the world. Whether you're talking about SAG-AFTRA with its 160,000 members, at any given point in time, even now with the strike going on, if they put out a call to action as a union, you'll find that they will probably be happy to get maybe 20% of people responding to it in a positive sense. In South Africa, we are probably more indifferent and lethargic than that. And we've got to try and turn that around. Here I am talking to you about survival of the sector. And there are actors who are maybe wondering, listening to this, thinking, what on earth is he on about? I'm doing fine. I just bought myself a nice, flashy, luxury German car. So we need to get people to resonate with what we are talking about, what are the, and yes, it can be technical, but then let's unpack it. Don't be afraid to ask the questions. That's what we are here to do. I want every actor in this country to know at least as much as I do about our sector.
Where does one sign up for SAGA?
Membership is available on application on SAGA's website. And
that would be www.saga.
Yes, at SA Guild of Actors. You will find our website informative with how to join SAGA and the resources that we have about SAGA submissions to Parliament, what it is we are telling our lawmakers. We've got a list of all our partners, which includes our various memoranda of understanding with other industry organizations, the Personal Managers Association, the KZN Film Commission, and others. So it'll be a very powerful resource if people went along to the SA Guild of Actors website and found what it is that we are doing for everyone.
So where do the agencies fit in this? Because 80% of talent is curated by some sort of agency or organization where I will go and I'll give you my show reel or my tape. You will find an appropriate role for me. I go audition, I land that role.
Yeah.
Shouldn't there be an education there from an agency's point of perspective? And is there no room for collaboration between SAGA and the agencies?
Yes, we do have a working relationship. What we found, unfortunately, is that there are two organizations that represent actor agents. SAGA has a memorandum of understanding with both those organizations. However, one of those organizations has now come out with a public statement saying that they reject the bills and that actors must be very careful about what it is that they are signing on to, which is hugely disappointing and very disturbing to us. Because, yes, going back to your earlier question, there is a responsibility on the agent's side to help actors understand what's in the contract that they're signing. That education may or may not be happening. We suspect that it's not happening enough. And SAGA also takes responsibility for that. We need to make sure that the actors are being educated. As much as your agent has a working commercial relationship with the actor, the agent, at the end of the day, can only act on the actor's behalf. They can't make the decision for the actor. They've got to make sure that the actor is advised enough for the actor to instruct the agent, yes, I'm going to go for this job at this agreed rate. So agents must be doing more to advise actors, and actors must be asking more questions.
Is there no opportunity for SAGA to do more of a door-to-door knocking and sit down with the producers? Because in some instances, the producers or the resistance that you're getting is because I might feel like you're trying to break things. And that's from a point of ignorance, because you haven't sat down with me and saying, listen, I understand that you're working on Isono or whatever, but in order to make sure that everybody's happy, we're just saying, let them continue working while they are well within their rights. All we're doing as SAGA is informing them that this is how they should be looking at contracts.
Yeah, indeed. And it's something that SAGA does do. And we would approach a production and say, we would like to educate the cast of your production. Would you give us permission to do that? And many producers are only too happy, because they know that a lot of the conflicts that they end up dealing with is because the actor doesn't understand the contract that they signed. Yes, there are those producers that see us as a threat and treat us with suspicion. I understand that. But there are any number of producers that we have assisted by approaching their cast of actors to say to the actors, allow SAGA to help you understand what the balance of rights are in this contract. Because remember, contracts are being drafted by the broadcasters. There's very little latitude that a producer may have, especially when it comes to commissioned TV work, about what goes into that contract. We like to present ourselves as a support and as a resource for producers as well, as much as we are to actors, except that in our case, we are mandated specifically by actors. We regularly talk to broadcasters, telling them, for example, I was on a set a few weeks ago where there were people who were engaging in potentially dangerous activities, where they were not being protected or supervised. There was dead vermin in the gutters that people had to be stepping over. There were live electrical cables running through pools of water. And I recorded this. I took pictures of this. I took video recording as well. And this alarmed the producers that, why would I be recording these things? And I said to them, this is the kind of thing that creates disasters on set. You have an obligation to exercise more control, where this is patent violation of occupational health and safety rules that puts everybody's lives at risk. In that moment, there is an obligation that also applies to the broadcaster. And I have a duty to take this material that I recorded, take it to the broadcaster to ask them, what are you doing as a broadcaster to ensure that the productions that you commissioned are being compliant in an occupational health and safety sense?
Are production houses accountable to the broadcaster? There's a David and Goliath situation where I'm one producer among however many. I'm the only person seeing a fault or a problem with what's happening. Everybody else is fine driving Porsches. So if I say anything I just like alienate myself as the bad person, or am I starting a cause that may or may not be worthwhile?
I wish there was a straightforward answer to that. I wish I could say everybody should be an activist. Not everybody will be. There are people who will cut corners and they would think that they are getting ahead and that they're protecting their profits and that they're feeding their families. They may well be doing that. I'm looking at the future of an industry. I'm looking to call it an industry in every sense and give it all the substantial meaning that it deserves. And I'm not sure we can do that if we are simply protecting our pockets. Maybe it's the mentality of somebody who's had enough. But I'm certainly that guy right now. And I'm saying, I'm going to change stuff. You are either going to come with me on this journey, or if you're going to try to present yourself as an obstacle to what I see as a necessary revolution in the creative sector, I will drive over you.
At which point will you say that now it's done?
I think with the establishment of perhaps not a bargaining council, because I mean that can be a very expensive exercise, but certainly a collective bargaining forum, that for me would be job done. And typically, when you reach that point of saying job done, it usually means the start of the next job. So I'm not afraid to do this. I don't need my name to be attached to it. I'm happy to say that this is the kind of evolution that is inevitable. I'm trying to make it happen faster.
And that was my time with Jack Devnarain, who was speaking about actor rights. He is the chairperson of SAGA, which is the South African Guild of Actors. In my next episode, I speak to an actress, a thespian, a performer, and a casting director. Her name is Nolwazi Shange. You may have seen her on Outlaws. And she tells us what it was like going from being in front of the camera to behind the camera. As always, you can listen to African Couch Potato, the mashup, on Spotify, Deezer, Apple Podcasts, pretty much any podcast platform. We are on Instagram at African Couch Potato, TikTok at African Couch Potato, and Twitter, now called X, as African Couch Pot, because they're just shortening everything. I'm Gino again, and thanks for tuning in.